All right, everyone, welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a really foundational concept from the phenomenologist Mikkel Dufresne. He makes this crucial distinction between what he calls the work of art and the aesthetic object. And trust me, once you grasp this difference, it's going to change how you experience art itself. So let's start with a little thought experiment. I want you to picture it. You're in a gallery, maybe MoMA, maybe the Louvre. You walk up to a painting. Now, what are you really looking at? I mean, on one level, it's an object, right? It's just stuff. Pigment on a piece of canvas stuck in a frame. But is that all it is? Is that physical material what you're actually there to experience? This very question, this little bit of tension right here, is the jumping-off point for Dufresne's entire project in aesthetics.
Okay, so Dufresne begins with the more straightforward of his two big ideas. Before we get into the tricky stuff, let's get a really clear, precise handle on what he means by the work of art.
For Dufresne, the work of art is all about materiality. It is, first and foremost, a thing. It's a physical artifact that exists out there in the world. It has, as one scholar put it, a constant being independent from being experienced. It's the stuff you could theoretically touch, though, please don't actually do that in a museum. He calls it a thing among things, and that means it has objective properties. Art historians can catalog it, conservators can work to preserve it. We can literally measure its dimensions with a ruler. It exists in objective time and space. The point is, it's there, sitting in the gallery, whether the lights are on or off, whether anyone is around to look at it or not. This is the solid, objective pole of our discussion.
All right, now we get to pivot. And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the matter, the concept that really gives his philosophy its power. This is where the phenomenology comes alive. Let's talk about the aesthetic object.
And listen to how Dufresne's language shifts here. He's not talking about a thing anymore. He's describing an event, an encounter. The aesthetic object isn't an object like a rock is an object. It is, in his words, a felt presence. That feeling, that affective quality, isn't just a side effect of looking at the object. It is the object, in a way. It constitutes its very being.
So here we have it, the core definition. The aesthetic object emerges from our perceptual encounter with the work. See, it doesn't just exist out there in the world on its own. It has to come into being for a consciousness, for a spectator. It's the work of art, but apprehended in a very specific way, a way that lets its unique qualities fully bloom.
This chart really lays out the contrast pretty starkly, doesn't it? On one side, you have the work of art. It's objective, it's a physical being, it's constant. On the other side, the aesthetic object. It's a perceptual experience, it's emergent, it can even be fleeting, and it's a felt presence. Now notice that last word. It's not purely subjective. That would mean it's just in your head. No, Dufresne says it's intersubjective. Why? Because it's still grounded in the work of art itself, but it absolutely requires a subject, a perceiver, for it to be realized.
And look, if you remember nothing else from today, remember this quote. This is Dufresne at his most elegant and precise. The aesthetic object isn't some ghost floating around the physical work, it is the work of art, but as it is perceived. And that last part, as perceived, is the key to everything. Perceived, that is, in the right way.
Well, that brings up the obvious next question, right? If the work of art is a thing and the aesthetic object is an experience, what connects the two? What's the bridge? For Dufresne, the bridge is us. It's the spectator. And this is not a passive role. It's an active, even demanding task. And this is absolutely crucial. The transformation from a work of art to an aesthetic object is not automatic. It doesn't just happen. You can walk right past a masterpiece in a museum while you're checking your phone, and for you, in that moment, it just stays a work of art, a thing on the wall. Dufresne says the work solicits us. It deserves a certain kind of perception to be fulfilled.
So what does this proper perception look like? Well, it's a process. First, the simple physical encounter. You have to be there. But second, and this is the key, you have to adopt an aesthetic attitude. That means you suspend all your practical, everyday interests. You're not asking what the painting is worth. You're not trying to identify the historical event for a quiz. You're just there with the work for its own sake. And only then, through what Dufresne calls a docile or faithful kind of looking, do you consecrate the work. You allow that aesthetic object to be fully realized.
Now, since you've all had your introduction to Husserl, this structure should feel pretty familiar. Dufresne brilliantly pulls in the concepts of noesis and noma here. Remember,
Noesis is the act of perceiving. It's the subjective side, your experience. And the noma is the object as it is perceived, the what that shows up for you. So Dufresne's move is to say the work of art and the aesthetic object share the same nomadic core. The difference is all in the noesis, the intentional act that grasps it. Is it a casual glance, or is it that dedicated aesthetic perception we've been talking about?
Okay, so at this point you might be thinking, Professor, this is a very neat set of boxes, a nice distinction, but what's the big philosophical payoff here? Why does this matter so much?
The stakes are actually huge. What Dufresne is trying to do here is move beyond that rigid split between subject and object that has dominated so much of Western philosophy. In his model, the aesthetic experience isn't just a subject looking at an external object. It's this dynamic dance, this profound interconnection, where both the viewer and the viewed are kind of created together.
In that moment of real aesthetic engagement, in that feeling, the boundary between you, the spectator, and the artwork, it becomes porous. There's what he calls a fundamental reciprocity. It's almost as if the artwork becomes a quasi-subject with its own life, and you're not some detached observer, but an active participant helping to bring its world into being. The subject and the object achieve what one commentator called a profound reconciliation.
So, I'll leave you with this to carry with you, because what Dufresne is ultimately doing is giving us, the spectators, this tremendous responsibility, and frankly, a pretty profound creative role. We aren't just passive consumers of art. In his view, we are the ones who consecrate the work, who fulfill its deepest purpose. We are, in a very real sense, co-creators of the aesthetic experience. Think about that next time you walk into a museum.